Here we go. I could tell people know what's coming because some people have already called and told me, look, I'm too tired. I'm not doing this tonight. I'll watch tomorrow. Hey, how you doing, everybody? Lee Stranahan here. I am in the home studio of Populous.tv and CitizenJournalismSchool.com. Let me mention CitizenJournalismSchool.com. I made a video for you over there. If I'm blowing your mind with well-researched factual journalism where you can confirm everything and doesn't insult your intelligence and is actually telling you the truth that the two sides that have been lying to you your whole life will never possibly tell you, I'd like to teach you how to do real journalism over at CitizenJournalismSchool.com. I'd like you to become part of what we're doing. And, wait one sec. Okay, good. I just had to make sure which webcam was on. I don't want this one on because it gets weird. But I would really like to have you be part of what we're doing at CitizenJournalismSchool.com. And, hang on, I made a video. Then if you go to CitizenJournalismSchool.com, you can find out about it. You can see it. Hang on one second. I want to get this up so that I can see comments too. Forgive me. Now you're set up there. Okay. So if you did not watch part 1 last night, I'm going to go over, it was a 3-hour, 15-minute Periscope last night talking about real Russiagate. So I'm going to warn you again that this Periscope, I expect, will go at least 2 hours. And let me explain why, and let me explain what I'm going to take you through. I'm going to take you through some of the prehistory. We're going to get to the 2016 election scandal, which is directly involving DNC, but DNC and establishment, deep state, worldwide deep state, in the 2016 election, using Ukraine, not even colluding with Ukraine so much as literally using them, right? They're colluding with them too. Since people like using the word collusion now, let's be honest, that's what it is. But I'm going to give you the prehistory. I'm going to give you a little bit of the prehistory. I'm going to give you a quick reminder of what we talked about last night, which is just that you've been lied to your entire life. Basically, you're being fed a narrative and have been. And we talked about historically some of the reasons last night, but you're being fed a narrative on, and you see left and right now, but I'm trying to get you beyond that, and I'm doing it factually. So I got to go over that again because you have to understand that the things you've been told about so many stories aren't true, and you're going to have a tough time dealing with this because with some of the things, so for instance, if I told you that both sides were lying in Benghazi, you may have some sort of emotional reaction to that when I tell you that, in fact, a video was the reason for it, and I could prove that to you. But that actually hides the deeper, darker story. A lot of people don't like hearing that. I'm just going to say that. I'm well aware of that. A lot of people don't like hearing that. I'm not going to go into that tonight. So right now, if you want to hold on to your illusion of Santa Claus about Benghazi, if you want to think that you weren't lied to by controlled opposition forces on both sides, okay, I'll leave you that because I don't have time to go into it all. Because I want to talk to you about the two things that you have been completely lied to about, Syria and Ukraine. And we'll talk about both of those things and how the cover-up of what this worldwide, one world, deep state, think tank, leftist organizing Soros-Alinskyite 501c3 clusterfuckage, right? That whole thing that runs the world right now. The people who meet at Davos, the millionaires, not millionaires. Millionaires are nothing to these people. It's the multi-billionaires, right, who meet at Davos and who show up at the Bilderberg meetings and are in Aspen, right? And then there's the hangers-on. There's the players, and there's the hangers-on. Which one of the? By the way, Glenn Simpson ain't a player. He's not. He's a caddy. Do you understand? He's a caddy. So, the Ukraine stuff then feeds right into the 2016 election stuff. But to understand some of that stuff, we got to do some prehistory first. So that's the agenda. I'm gonna talk about how you've been lied to your entire life. I'm going to give you a little bit more of that. I want you to understand the methods that they use to lie to you. It's very important. I'm going to ask you again, as we go through this, fact check me in real time. Someone last night, Sarah, did a great job of grabbing links and posting them, better links than I was finding in some cases. Because again, we've got the screen over here, so I can bring up the screen and then I can bring up web pages and stuff, and I'll be able to do that. That's one of the ways we'll go through this. But I urge you once again to check my work. And the reason is I urge you to check all work. I will mention again, if you're not familiar with me, I used to write for the Huffington. I was in TV and film for a long time, a visual effects artist. Worked at Access Hollywood for about 5 years. Then became a political comedian, then a writer doing serious reporting at the Huffington Post. Met Andrew Breitbart, worked with Andrew Breitbart. We were best friends until he died. And then and Andrew Breitbart said that working with me was the best professional experience of his life. There's video of him saying that out there. And then after he died, it was very tricky. It was a very, very difficult period because Breitbart immediately did not do what Andrew wanted them to do, which was to cover original stories, which is what I'm very good at that. I've made my reputation for getting, I was the guy when I was a Democrat and writing for Huffington Post to say that, well, it was obvious John Edwards was having an affair. And I reported that and nobody else wanted to talk about it. I got kicked off Daily Cause for it. And then, of course, everything I said turned out to be right. And if you go to Huffington Post, you can probably still find the article where I made predictions about John Edwards. And they were all correct. And they were months before they happened. And that's because I had sources and I followed things up and I did research and I was talking to people behind the scenes and doing the work you do as a reporter. And this is what I've done consistently, including, as I'll talk about in a minute here, going to Lebanon in 2013. I had to quit Breitbart to do that. Bannon did not want me to go. And my career in covering big stories is more important than almost anything to me. So I just quit. And then I reported just a whole bunch of other stories. And but the Lebanon ones I mentioned because it's going to be important later. And I mentioned some of this stuff because all of it's really affected where I'm at now on the way I see the world. So let's roll a clip first, okay? This is a little bit of a refresher. It's not going to take long from last night. I'm going to show a slightly different clip. But I want to show, this is Anthony Sutton, a historian, author. Well, let me bring that up. Here's his Wikipedia page. Died in 2002. So, very serious guy, right? And with a very impressive resume. He was at the Hoover Institution and stuff like that. And he wrote a book on the Order, or the Skull and Bones Society. There we go. In the early 80s. He used a combination of public domain information on Skull and Bones and previously unreleased documents sent to him by a woman whose father was a Skull and Bones member. Anyway, you see the idea here. So he talked about the Order of Skull and Bones. Now, I got to say, if you're not familiar with the Skull and Bones thing, I'm just going to give you one hint that you're living in a world of propaganda. If you were living in a world where there were any legitimate journalistic organizations whatsoever, this Skull and Bones thing would have been over years ago, right? It's a secret society, explicitly a secret society, almost, as far as I know, exclusively white and male. Just stop right there. That would be enough. And it's a secret society where powerful people are, right? So if journalists were doing their job with any kind of resources, 60 Minutes or New York Times or anything, they would be all over this, right? I mean, it's not a myth. It's not fiction. It's not made up. In fact, And I'll show the clip first. I might show it twice. I showed this last night, but I want you to see it again. This is during the 2004 presidential election when George W. Bush was running against John Kerry, who will play a role later in our story because, of course, John Kerry was Secretary of State when a lot of this stuff happened, including the Maidan coup in the UN. Let's point that out. He is a member of Skull and Bones. So just bookmark that, as in Stephen Mnuchin, by the way, the Treasury Secretary, who was also in business with George Soros. So let's watch Tim Russert interview George W. Bush and John Kerry and ask them about Skull and Bones. I'm just pointing out that Tim Russert, some people like to point this out. I don't think these two are causally connected, but Tim Russert did pass away shortly after this. It is sad and kind of weird, but I'm not laughing because it's good and I feel sorry for his family, but, you know. So here's Tim Russert asking George W. Bush and John Kerry about Skull and Bones, and watch their reaction.
You were both in Skull and Bones, the secret society.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America? The conspiracy theorists are going to go on.
I'm sure they are. I don't know. I haven't seen the web.
Number 322?
First of all, he's not the nominee. And, look, I look forward...
Are you prepared to lose?
No, I'm not going to lose.
You both were members of Skull and Bones, a secret society at Yale. What does that tell us?
Not much, because it's a secret.
Is there a secret handshake? Is there a secret code?
I wish there were something secret I could manifest.
322, a secret number?
There are all kinds of secrets, Tim, but one thing is not a secret. I disagree with this president's direction that he's taking the country. We can do a better job, and I intend to do it.
And we'll be watching. Be safe on the campaign trail. John Kerry, thanks for joining us. And we'll be right back.
Best line there is, well, there are all kinds of secrets, Tim, but one thing it's not a secret. That's the best. Well, there are all kinds of secrets, Tim. Did you murder somebody? Well, there are all kinds of murder, but this president, one thing that's clear, is murdering the economy. You see, that's the way you switch it around. I'm just saying, that's John Kerry, professional politician. Now, both were members of Skull and Bones. Let's go right away to this little clip. I've cut into a part of this video I play sometimes. This is Anthony Sutton talking about how Skull and Bones works and what their motives might be, what the Skull and Bones Secret Society, one of a number of these secret societies that operates out in the open and no one ever tries to do. Where's the investigative? It's left to guys like Luke Rosiak and, not Luke Rosiak, forgive me, Luke from We Are Change. I'm spacing on his last name for some reason, but you know who I mean, Luke Radowski. Luke and Alex Jones and people like that to actually go and try to show up at the Bilderberg meeting. And, of course, they're branded as crazy, which would kind of make it a controlled opposition thing, since the Bilderberg thing is completely real and the kind of thing that shouldn't be Luke and Alex out there. It should be Morley Safer or whoever, right? I don't know who's still on 60 Minutes anymore, but you see my point, right? This, if we had a real journalistic apparatus, that's what would be happening. If I were the editor of the New York Times tomorrow, it's the first thing I'd do. I'd go, well, let's Skull and Bones just over at, say, New Haven, and just go in, get to the bottom of this shit. Fuck the secret society. What the fuck? That's what I'd be like. And that's why I'm never going to be the editor of the New York Times. Let's watch Anthony Sutton talk about this. Oh, by the way, I got to remind you again, retweet this puppy, please. There's some amazing stuff here. Watch this.
The causes one can only deduce at this point from the operations of these men as individuals and working together. They want to acquire power above all.
Power
Political
to do what?
power. As you look at their actions, the political power is to bring about what they call a new world order, which is a one world. But they use the Hegelian techniques, and we know enough about Hegel to know that not only does this mean the dialectic process, the creation of conflict, but it also means that individuals such as you and I or anybody watching this program, will be cogs in the state, that we have no individual rights. Our rights for Hegel, individual rights for Hegel, come about through obedience to the state. We see it in the educational process, which we'll probably talk about later, that we have adopted what I call a Hegelian system of education, which is not to bring out your innate talents, but to prepare you to be an individual cog in the state.
Now, are you saying the members of the order believe this, and this is a part of their worldview?
I would say that there is a minority within the order that does believe it. There's one thing I've learned in looking at the papers, that they're not all active. Maybe at any one time only 20% are active. Undoubtedly, the 20% that are active have this goal. If you look at Taft's great work, although as a president he hasn't accounted for very much in the literature, Taft's great work was to bring about the World Court, international law. International law and a world court will be essential in a new world order. If you take, for example, the career of Bush, Vice President Bush, when he was ambassador to the United Nations, he helped a process called Mondialization, which was a process by which an individual American city would adopt United Nations stature. In other words, it's a diminution, a dilution of U.S. sovereignty. So if you look at these individuals, Stimson is another very good example.
Okay, let me stop it right there. So that's Anthony Sutton talking about the methods that these Skull and Bone members do. I think he says something there that's very important, actually, by the way, which is he talks about not everybody there is active, maybe 20% are active, and so on. And this is the thing to understand. Like I say, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I'm a conspiracy realist. And it's very hard to get any group of people in complete lockstep over stuff. So you always do see these battles and everything like that. And thank God, because if they were in complete lockstep on everything, it was something. And not everybody's in on it and everything else. Not everybody knows about it, and not everybody looks at it that deeply. But when I see people who I know are omitting details on purpose, such as I've described at Fox News, by the way, everything I'm about to show you tonight, Fox News, Bongino, Solomon, they're not really telling you. They didn't tell you the truth about Syria. They didn't tell you what really happened in Ukraine. I'll tell you what happened. They don't talk about the history of what's going on. They don't really tell you the truth because, once again, it's not surprising. It's not like they're bad journalists. They're controlled opposition because both sides are controlled. Both sides are controlled. It's not like one side is legitimate. Do you understand? Do you understand? It's not like one side's legitimate or one side's illegitimate, and then the other side's a response to that. The way they set this up is they give you two false choices, or two choices that aren't really a choice at all, right? Bush, Kerry, either way you're getting it. And I remind people that the other example I like to use of this, remember these Skull and Bones I just show this again. The Skull and Bones logo, I'm not making this up, is a 322. You heard Tim Russert ask a couple people about that. See the 322? That's the skull. That's their logo. Okay, so what I tell people is you can use that to remember Senate Resolution 322 from the year 2006. And if you just Google that in, you want to talk about controlled opposition. This is a bill in 2006. And again, I couldn't find it last night. Let's see if I can find it tonight. But this is a bill introduced by Joe Biden. Okay? And if I go through someplace, hang on one second. I think I remember what I did wrong. See, I like to have everything zoomed in close, but I think yeah, that's what it is. These tabs don't show if I'm zooming in that close. So Senate Resolution 322 in 2006 about a guy named Khodorkovsky who's right at the center of the real Russiagate, and Fox never talks about this guy. But why? Why? Because Senate Resolution 322, sponsored by Joe Biden, and had two co-sponsors. That would be John McCain and Barack Obama. They co-sponsored in 2005, and of course, just a few years later, they were the two Republican and Democratic candidates. By the way, you would think that a bill that the Republican and the Democrat were both supporting, like somebody in the media would go, oh, that might be an interesting human interest story. Let me look into this Khodorkovsky thing. But no, they don't look into it. And the reason they don't look into it is because it shows that you're being fed controlled opposition. That's what you're being fed on both sides. It's a tactic. It's a Hegelian tactic, right? You set up the opposition, right? You create the opposition. You create that. And this is a trick that elites have used, and they've used it in a variety of ways, actually. Like, this is associated with communism. And someone like Sutton, and rightly, Marx was a Hegelian, right? So that's not incorrect, but this is really a tactic that's been adopted by the elites, and they use it all the time. And if you look back at the early history of communism, Marx's background and Engels' background in particular is very interesting. Just saying, they're not generally from the people, And of course, Marx was an intellectual, and I have another theory on that, but I won't go into it now. But when you look at Marxism in the historical context, it was a failed experiment. But it was an experiment at the time, and it was an experiment that was against monarchy and oligarchy in the way that we mean it today, and all these other things. And I can see why it seemed like a better alternative, but of course it was doomed to failure for a variety of reasons. I think, not least of which, again, I say this because I'm a Christian, but I'll just leave it there. It's rejection of spiritual values, but even that, in a historical context, was coming at a time when, in all of the sciences, you were getting a more mechanistic view of nature and man. You could see that with Darwin, don't forget this is the 1800s, and you could also see that with the rise of psychology, and particularly the branches of psychology that were associated with people like B.F. Skinner, for instance, the behaviorist school. Now, I mention this not just because it's interesting to note that this whole mechanistic view of the world, where you remove God from it, was happening in science and as well as in philosophy. But in particular, the Skinnerian view became the basis for a lot of the psychological experiments that would happen that would be very influential on both the deep state, CIA, and modern advertising, right? And that's sort of, again, the world that we live in right now. They learned a lot from treating people, and that's when they were doing that period of, of the behaviorists. That's when Skinner's one, Pavlov is another one, the famous Pavlov dog things, and a number of Germans. And the woman who gave the material to Sutton, she's got some very interesting stuff to say about that, and it's on YouTube, and sometime you might want to seek it out. I'll play it again sometimes. Fascinating. But it's helpful to understand this stuff, because what you're seeing isn't new at all. Now let's get to the two things. So that's the kind of setup. I want you to understand. This is a technique that they use, and they know it works, that psychological understanding. By the way, it's being used right now on you when you put on Facebook. Go Google this. You can find it pretty easily. Well, hang on. I should be able to find it here myself pretty easily. If I say you can do it, I got a computer right here. Sure, it's fun to hear myself talk, but always better to prove things. I don't even know if I'm going to be able to find it here. Hang on. Facebook triggers addiction. It's an article, you know, my brother sent this to me. And 5 psychological reasons you're addicted to Facebook. Facebook addiction. I'm not seeing what I'm looking for. I will just tell you about it, but this looks interesting, so let's look at it. But they were programming so that you would get notified, right? One second. Okay, so this is the checking of Facebook notifications. What the article said, and it was a legit article, what the article said basically is that the programmers at Facebook, they've programmed it so you get hit with notifications at such a way that, you know, when you need a new dopamine hit. Does that make sense? If it doesn't, just let it slide, right? So my point is that this psychology affected a lot of things. It affected education, for instance. It affected Dewey and the entire Progressive School of Education. We talked about in part 1. I got a little teeny bit into the Frankfurt School, a little tiny bit, but you have to factor that in as well, because the Frankfurt School, again, communists who were coming out of that same view moved into entertainment, the media, and education, and they advocated that sort of what's called cultural Marxism. They didn't use that phrase really, but that group of people like Erich Fromm and Helmholtz and Herbert Marcuse, who we talked about yesterday just a little bit, they were very influential. Like literally, who was it? Fromm, I think, literally moved to, or may have been Ardino. One of them literally moved to Hollywood. They were in Hollywood doing script consulting and stuff like that. And so all of these things were converging at the end of the 1800s and early 1900s. And that, again, right, and it was going up to the 50s. And you had the birth in 1947 of the CIA. Truman put the CIA, created it out of the OSS in 1947. But around that same time, again, it also started to be, if you ever watched the show Mad Men, like the golden age of advertising, where they were suddenly using psychological testing and all of that stuff, right? Focus groups. That didn't exist before. You can watch it in Mad Men. It's pretty accurate historically. And again, it's not a surprise. It's based on that same school of psychology. They know how to make you buy stuff. It's not an accident. You right now are living a consumer dictatorship. You're living in Brave New World, in fact, is what you're living in. You're living in a world where it looks like you've got a tremendous amount of choice, because you do in some areas. The number of 4K TVs you can get right now at Best Buy, the supply is overwhelming, right? So you've got that stuff, and that's good because that keeps you from not figuring out what the fuck is actually going on, right? But that's where they can pump the messages out to you and everything else. And I'm not one of those people who like overly worries, like, is Alexa listening in on me? Yeah, I know, yes, it has, blah, 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 blah. But I think the thing people need to worry more about is, are you tuned to in Alexa? Are you tuned into that too much? Are you getting your news from big organizations like Fox that you trust because you don't trust MSNBC, or vice versa? I see people saying this all the time.
I don't know that one.
Oops, see, there's Alexa right there listening, so shh. You hear that? But that's what's going on. That's the world that you live in. So everything we're going to talk about, you have to understand, no mainstream media organization was telling you the truth on it. Syria, you've not been told the truth in Western media. You've had to go seek it out yourself. Now, don't take my word for any of this. I'm going to show you. I went over there as a reporter, but don't take my word for any of it. Okay? So, let's start with Ukraine. A couple things you need to know. Oops, hang on one second. Let's bring up that screen again. Okay, so the first thing you need to know is that this bad relationship between the U.S., Ukraine, goes back. Okay, I got to keep that up. Yeah. So let's. Oh, let me do this too. The best film to watch on this is Igor Lopatnik's Ukraine on Fire. This is the best film to watch on this. Now, it's a very dense film. It's on Amazon Prime. You can watch it right now. If you're an Amazon Prime member, you can watch it for free. If you got to rent it for $5, do it. This is a great, great, great movie. Everybody I knew who's seen it thought it was great. You're going to have to watch it a couple of times probably because it's very information-packed. And this gives a lot of the history and everything of Ukraine. So I'm not going to try to fill in for that. So let me just talk you through a little bit of it, okay? Ukraine has a history of going sort of back and forth in its alliances. Ukraine has this history for hundreds of years, okay? And Ukraine is split. The big split, of course, is the East and West. One side is more pro-Russian, and the other side is very anti-Russian. And this is historic and goes back. It's an old fight, and who started it? It's one of those things where it's like, it's very, very hard to discern. But none of this history is explained to you by the Western media properly. By the way, a guy who got this completely is Paul Manafort, and that's one of the reasons they silenced him. But Ukraine on Fire does explain a lot of this stuff very, very, very well. Now, the U.S. involvement started after World War II. World War II was a big deal because there were factions of Ukrainians, including one, let's bring up the screen for this, with a guy named Stefan Bandera. And Bandera, let me just, is, by the way, this is history, but it's still important today, and I'll show it to you. It was, I guess there. Okay. So he was a Ukrainian, extremist political person. Oh, this is not a good reference. I'm just going to go. There's his name. Let me show you, by the way, why it's still important. Every January 1st, they celebrate Stefan Bandera's birthday to this day, and they do it with a Tiki Torch March. See that Tiki Torch March there? This is what goes on in the Ukraine. And by the way, this is part of a story that I got sued over, even though I said nothing incorrect whatsoever, but it's part of the silencing regime that's going on. And so it says he was a Nazi collaborator, and that's true. He was responsible for the mass execution of Jews and Poles. That's all true. But they celebrate him. Now, how did I get sued? I had watched the film Ukraine on Fire, and then a couple days later, Charlottesville happened. Right after I'd watched it. And when I saw the Torch March, I was like, gee, this is just like that thing I saw in the film. And I'd commented on it, and this is before Heather Heyer got killed. And I immediately said, no one defend this in any way. I said, this is awful and blah, blah, blah. But I had seen the way things were building with these protests. And I'd seen they'd become more violent because I covered a lot of Black Lives Matter protests. And this was like, I see it was getting crazy. I could see that on inauguration in Washington, D.C. And I was like, okay, this is getting crazy and people need to really... Now I see what they were doing, in fact, in my opinion, is this has been one of those created conflicts where I believe there are the equivalent of agent provocateurs on both sides. They may, and those provocateurs may be people in the media or something, but I'm convinced that the elites want to keep people fighting. So I'm convinced that they're actually completely the reason you're not seeing anybody go after Antifa or anybody like that is they want that. They want that sort of group out there. Because, for instance, with the mask, with the black bloc thing that they do, right? If you were trying to encroach on a group and you were the state, that gives you an easy disguise that's acceptable. You see, so you don't want to get rid of it. Now, we're talking about Bandera. Now, by the way, I got to point out that John McCain and Lindsey Graham spent January 1st of 2016 in Ukraine. You've probably seen this picture of McCain, Ukraine, Nazi. You've seen these pictures, certainly, of John McCain with the head of Svoboda. Oh, I was hoping that was a picture. But anyway, you've seen it. You can see it. You can see it in the... There we go. That guy's the head of Svoboda, and John McCain was on stage with him. And again, what you'll notice is the John McCain view on Ukraine is exactly the same as the Obama and Clinton thing. And I showed a little chart yesterday where I showed, you can see this, I showed it, the Soros funding of John McCain. And again, let's just point out here that I'm explaining to you this is how the world works. The world actually works. That these two sides, it's not an accident that they just happened to push McCain and give him so much media time. He was doing his job as McCain knew what was going on. McCain is not one of those guys who's innocent. So I point out that this history with the Nazis and everything, it shocked some people, but it ain't new, right? It's not new at all. This is very important for you to understand. If you type in search engines, CIA, Lebed, LEB, Village Voice, you will find documents directly from the CIA's, look, it's from CIA.gov. This is from the actual CIA site that will confirm what I'm about to tell you. Everything I'm saying here will confirm, which is the CIA after World War II, this war criminal, and by the way, the stuff that he did, the stuff that Lebed did was disgustingly atrocious, and that's all I'll say. It was horrific, right? So he was sentenced to death in Poland in 1934. He died in Pittsburgh in 1998, and he was the CIA. He worked for the CIA for years. He worked for the CIA. He was brought over here. He died in Pittsburgh. He's a 100% clear war criminal. If you read what he did, it's disgusting. So I'll give you one example. Cutting open pregnant women and putting animals inside them. That's an example. So these people were, when I say war criminal, I'm serious. But we supported them. And if you read the CIA files, they were aware of this. So what happened was a Village Voice reporter was going to do actual journalism and was writing about how the government was doing this. And the CIA went out and did a whole plot to lie to protect this Nazi war criminal and to lie to the press. So this is, and again, this is in all through the 50s, the 60s. This happened in 1986, right? So this is the kind of history, and again, here's how I do journalism. I'm not conjecturing. I showed you, you can see for the CIA admits they were doing this. If there was real journalism in the country that didn't get shut down and that people weren't, by the way, remember what I said before about Brave New World? We live in a consumer culture, right? And A lot of journalists just are trying to pay the rent. And so that's another factor that corrupts them. But it is. And but this is admitted to by the CIA. The CIA is not denying any of this. And so I just want to point out that this history of supporting the Nazi elements, which inherently means that they were anti-communist, right? Which is true. They were anti-communist, but they were not. They were Nazis, and then even after Bandera and that group split off from the actual Nazis, they maintained that sort of thing. Now, what happened was a lot of Ukrainians fled the Ukraine in the 50s and 60s and became the Ukrainian diaspora, the people who'd left the country, in Canada and the U.S. Okay? And this is going to start to get us into some of the modern history. By the way, all this history is still important because you saw McCain was there with this guy. So there's still the deep state, the apparatus of the elite has supported this, right? But again, it's history you're not told about, right? And you can find it, but you got to look for it. So the I'm trying to think where I want to take this right now. Do I want to take this to the modern election stuff, or let me think. Let me bring it to the modern election stuff. A woman named Alexandra Chalupa is at the center of a lot of this. Alexandra Chalupa was a DNC operative. She worked in Bill Clinton's White House, where she was an assistant to Hillary Clinton. She spent many years as a DNC operative. You can find that story, the definitive story on this, very easily, which is Ukraine sabotage DNC I'm searching for. And voila. Ukrainian efforts to sabotage Trump's backfire. Now, this is a story that came out in January 2017. Now, one of the things that we know is recent filings from Mueller show. Now, I want you to, let's think about this here for a second. It's January 2017. This is a few days before the inauguration. Paul Manafort is not even a suspect because Trump's not in yet. But Manafort knows that he was booted from the campaign in August of 2016 for pretty shaky reasons. Reasons that we now know were election interference by Ukrainians. And the reason we know that is that if you just type in Leshchenko, Ukrainian election interference. Here, let's go with this. That's Sputnik. Let's not go with that. Here's Newsweek. Paul Manafort. I'm not going with Sputnik because I want you to have a source that. It's not that the story's wrong. It just, here's Newsweek, okay? Paul Manafort financial revelation interfered in 2016 election against Donald Trump, Ukrainian court says. Now, I'm going to stop you right there. This story, if Fox News were not controlled opposition, I'll say it again. If Fox News were not controlled opposition, if they actually supported the president, this revelation in December of last year, just a few months ago, would be the biggest story on Fox News every day. Every day they should be talking about this. No, we don't have to. They'd be talking about Chalupa every day. They'd be talking about Leshchenko every day. They don't talk about it. In fact, they distract you from it. Because this shows in a news cycle where 2 years have been dominated by what is the collusion, right? In that news cycle, this completely flips the script. Do you understand? Completely flips the narrative. Now, they have not covered this. They may have given a little bit of coverage. You see this on Newsweek. It's a one-day story, right? It's a one-day story, but they want to bury it. Why do they want to bury it? Because you are not watching real news. You are watching an illusion that is meant to get you to root for one team in order to control your voting. You dig? Do you understand? You have to get rid of it. You have to get rid of this theory in your head that Fox is actually on the president's side. They are not on the president's side. Furthermore, I know that this story was kept from the president, according to Bob Woodward, because he said McMaster, and I believe this happened, because I could see it with Seb Gorka. I could see it talking, Seb Gorka moving to try to discredit me, right? I'm saying nothing on the story. He talked about it a little bit, but then he backed off of it. Okay? And again, I know Seb, and I know Bannon. I was trying to tell Steve Bannon, look, guys, you got a big story. Nothing. Not interested in any fact whatsoever. Zero. So, that's what I know personally. Okay? But this Ukrainian court ruled that it was election interference, and the people involved were the head of NABU. We'll talk about that later. The FBI was involved, and we'll talk about how. And Leshchenko, who is funded by two of Hillary Clinton's top donors, her two top donors, Soros and Pinchuk. We'll talk about that. Okay? But this right here is the story, basically. It is the story. Okay. So how did we get to that point? The way we got to that point is that a DNC operative named Alexandra Chalupa, who goes back to the first Clinton White House, right, had a thing for Manafort, where she was out to get him. She and her sister Andrea Chalupa and their other sister Irina Chalupa in Ukraine were out to get Manafort in 2015. If you read the Politico story, it goes into a great deal of detail about this, including comments from Chalupa. By the way, it's 100% verified. By the way, the reporters stand by this. There's been no retraction on this story. They stand by their reporting. This is a huge story. So I found this story a few months after it came out. But the guy who saw it at the time was Manafort. And the way I know that is because Robert Mueller complained about it. I really want you to understand with the Mueller investigation. The Mueller investigation is designed to control the narrative, to shut down the story on behalf of the powerful elites connected to the Clintons, but not just the Clintons, and McCain, and this whole group of people who are connected to, as we talked about last night, secret societies like Skull and Bones, the people who meet at Bilderberg, the Davos crowd, that whole group, right, which is 100% real. Their goals are very clear. They control the entire media landscape, everything. So if you see a debate on MSNBC, it is just as fake as a debate on Fox and vice versa. It is very, very rare. Now, again, not everybody's involved. There are parameters, but you can tell what they really don't want you to learn about by what they omit and what they don't talk about. So you'll get one story on this, but where's the follow-ups? Where are the follow-ups? Ukrainian interference in the election kind of seems like a big story to me, right? Do you understand? It is a big story, and that's why they're not covering it. So, Alexandra Chalupa is part of that Ukrainian diaspora that I mentioned a bit ago when I talked about how in the period after World War II, there became a big Ukrainian diaspora. They are all Banderites, generally. They are all the right-wing Nazi type. That's who they are. Generally speaking, broadly speaking, that's who they are. Okay, again, it's too large a group to stereotype everybody, but that's largely what it is. And the Ukrainian Weekly, which is a newspaper which has spoken favorably of the Chalupas a number of times, that basically is the right of that, because they had a split in the 80s from that newspaper. You find a lot of interesting things there, though, including about the Chalupas, Alexandra and Andrea, and how they, in the U.S., were doing protests at Manafort's in Connecticut, where Manafort's father was mayor. I believe he's from Bridgeport, and his father used to be mayor, and they protested Paul Manafort there, and blah, blah, blah. This is back in 2015 they were doing this. Then, and again, this is before the Trump Tower meeting. This is before the supposed DNC hack. This is before any of that. Alexandra Chalupa was targeting Paul Manafort and saying Trump had dealings with Russia. Notice that Mueller has gotten Paul Manafort. But let me take you out of this for a second. Let's think about this. So I want you to picture Paul Manafort. And he sees this article. And he knows the players, and he knows the people, and he realizes, oh my goodness, there was an attempt to get Trump from gaining office. The Ukrainians were on Hillary Clinton's side, and he understands the dynamics, so he's concerned about it, so he starts to contact Trump about it, and he starts to warn him. Now, we know about this, actually, because Mueller is furious about that. This is what Mueller is saying was the communications that he wants to stop. Go look into that yourself. You can probably find it. Let me do it this way. I don't know if this will work. But once you understand the actual dynamics here, so Michael Avenatti, the Stormy Daniels lawyer, is, there we go. It's Alexandra Chalupa. Let's bring it up. So you know who Michael Avenatti is. I'm now representing Alexandra Chalupa in connection with the investigation. Whoops, sorry. You're not seeing it. I'm now representing Alexandra Chalupa in connection with the investigations and pursuing possible legal claims against Manafort, Trump, and other affiliated individuals. And he quotes a Vox article here, okay? She was targeted with baseless, bogus allegations and designed to distract away from Trump's Russia collusion. Well, no, actually, that article came out before. If you look at it, they're not baseless. She admits to them. She admits she was meeting with people at the Ukrainian embassy. And I've interviewed Andrei Telechenko, who was was the guy at the embassy she talked to. So, no, they're not baseless and bogus, but okay. But this Vox article is very interesting, and it's interesting that it was pushed by Avenatti as it was. Paul Manafort advised White House on how to attack and discredit investigation of President Trump. Now, if you read this article, I'm going to go to Reader View to make it easier to see. Okay, so we now have details. I'm just scrolling down. Wait. So, Special Counsel Robert Mueller alleged in court filings that Manafort told multiple discernible lies to the FBI and prosecutors. Now, the lies. Now that's interesting, but you have to look what this is about. Hang on. Manafort wanted nothing less to declare a public relations war on the FBI, a person said. Now they're not saying that's a characterization, but I'm going to go with that. Another goal is to discredit the FBI Director James Comey and senior FBI officials. Now, why would he do that? And the answer is because the FBI is right at the heart of this entire scandal, as I'll show you. And you'll see, if I'm just scrolling through, because if you get to what the specifics of what Manafort was warning him about. Here we go. Manafort urged the president to attack the DNC. So you have to keep scrolling because it's down. Manafort counseled the White House to allege, albeit with no evidence to back up said charges. As you're about to see, there's a ton of evidence. Manafort counseled the White House to allege that the pro-Western Ukrainian government had colluded with the Democratic National Committee to try to help Hillary Clinton win the 2016 election. So this is Vox saying, with no evidence to back it up, and I will just show you, all you have to do if you want evidence, all you have to do if you want evidence is, let's go to WikiLeaks. But by the way, you don't even have to do that. Go to Alexander, oh, I'll show you one other thing. Alexander Chalupa, Kia Post. Hang on. They had an interview with her. Hang on, that's what I'm looking for. So here's CNN story where she denies working with him, but even then it's a non-denial denial. Read that. I've gone over that before, but feel free to read that. Ukrainian court, blah, blah, blah. I'm not finding it easily. She did an interview in the Kiev Post, and she admits that she's the one who went after Manafort and everything else. But the other way is you can go to WikiLeaks here, and you just type in Ali Chalupa. You want proof. Now, again, Vox has told their readers that there's no proof to these accusations. In fact, there is proof. And in fact, let me just do that. WikiLeaks, Ali Chalupa. There we go. This is from WikiLeaks. All these emails have been verified. No one's denying it. No one has denied it, by the way. No one has denied that this is a... one sec. I just want the original document. That's all I want. Oops, hang on. There we go. Thank God. Okay, so this is from Alexander Chalupa. Initially, this is being forwarded by Luis Miranda. He's the DNC person who was put into place by Hillary Clinton's joint fundraiser agreement, which was secret, by the way. Put a pin in that. I'll remind you of it later. Luis Miranda, he was the comms director for the DNC. Here's Ali Chalupa saying that she's working with Michael Isikoff, and she went with 68 investigative journalists from the Ukraine, and that she is trying to get, since I started digging into Manafort, these messages, by the way, she's meeting with them at a group, the Open World Leadership Center. She called it Open World Societies because it is a Soros-founded group, but we'll come back to that later as well. But not for years, but still, he's part of the founding of it, as is Khodorkovsky, right? So she's talking about how she's using it for political purposes as part of the Library of Congress, right? And then she also says More offline tomorrow, since there's a big Trump component you and Lauren need to be aware of that I will hit in the next few weeks, and something I'm working on that you should be aware of. So more offline, in other words, she's going to talk to them in a personal or some other conversation offline about this. She's clearly working with the DNC, like working with the this is not a minor player, and again, she was in the Clinton White House. And so this is all confirmed. Furthermore, the entire story that I showed you before, this one, how about this Politico story? And I got to point out, Vox is just flat out lying to people, flat out lying. But if we keep going in the story, because there's lots of stuff, a source with direct knowledge of the matter told me that the White House adopted Manafort's recommendation in the summer of 2017 to specifically target Alexander Chalupa, a political strategist and consultant for the DNC, for allegedly working with Ukrainian officials to hurt Trump's candidacy. Despite a torrent of allegations, no evidence has surfaced that Chalupa or the DNC did anything wrong. I beg to differ. So Manafort saw what was going on, right? Then they talk about how Trump responded here. And they talk about Matthew Whitaker's involvement. By the way, Matthew Whitaker knows about this. He does know about it. I don't know how much he knows about it, but I wish to God he'd do something about it. But, are you, okay. I'm going to go back to what I said before in a big picture way, but I think I just demonstrated to you in a way you may not have understood before, which is part of the purpose of Mueller's shutting down of Manafort is that they were concerned that Manafort would tell Trump the truth. Do you understand? There are people surrounding the president right now who absolutely don't have his best interest at heart. In fact, I would say almost no one surrounding him does. I trust Don Jr. That's about it. I trust Don Jr., Eric, right? That's about it. You know, I'm not counting Melania or whatever. And I'm not even discounting Ivanka for a personal betrayal. I just don't think she knows any better. Ivanka Trump's a New York liberal who's married to Jared Kushner, whose father was the biggest Democrat donor in New Jersey and who's done deals with Soros and blah, 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 blah. That's who she is. So, but he's surrounded by people who don't have his best interest at heart. And working together, the pressure from the media, which is all controlled, the pressure from Mueller of the indictment of Manafort. They had to shut Manafort up. They could not have Manafort getting the truth to Trump. And by the way, Roger Stone told me this a number of times. Roger Stone told me over the past couple of years, because I've worked with Roger on this stuff and other things before as well, and the Stasi-like police state attack on Roger Stone is meant to frighten everybody. And I just want people to know, again, I'm telling this because I'm not being frightened into shutting up. I'm going to tell people this is the kind of thing you're going to want to download, because the information I'm giving you may be the kind of thing you have to put into a thumb drive, which you hand off to somebody in the middle of the night, because that's the only way to keep the truth spreading from person to person. But if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. But they are trying to shut down people and silence people. And they absolutely know about me, because Mueller, they were asking questions about me in the grand jury. So they absolutely know about me. But I am not going to be silenced. And that's why I'm doing these very long, very detailed, prove it for yourself things. We showed last night, it looks like the page of the Genie Energy page showing their advisory board. I can't find it. I've talked to other people. They can't find it. Seems like they pulled that down. I've been talking about that for about a year. They pulled my entire YouTube page down. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But I want you to understand that Manafort understood. I've never talked to Manafort. I've only talked to his lawyer, I think, once. And I didn't, it was non-substantive. And so I don't know this, but I do know what he knows. He knew what was going on. He could see what was going on. He was targeted by Chalupa, and the reason they had to take him out is he's the advisor close to the president who could be honest with him. Roger Stone's been telling me they're controlling, and there's other articles that say this, they've been controlling the information that the president gets, and they're fine with him getting Fox because they control Fox. Fox is not covering these stories, period. Someone's saying Julian too. You're exactly right. Julian Assange is the person who could clear up this whole Russia thing. You're exactly right. And that's what I've said. And part of the reason they get into it, they get away with it, is that people see the partisan bickering. And because of the propaganda machine that's in effect, they form attachments one way or another. They don't want you to be smart. Again, this is control of the educational system. The whole educational system, which was, again, a progressive thing, it goes back to the work of Dewey, and it has to do with creating good factory workers. It has to do with creating good factory workers and good consumers. You need people who can act like machines. Do what you're told, crank this lever, pick up your paycheck, and shut up. And here, buy some stuff and watch some TV, right? That's what it's designed for. And it's done a pretty effective job. But that's why I'm a stickler for cogent thought, proof. Because it's the tool we have. It's the tool that you and I have. It's the objective playing field where if someone says, and this is why I always do this to people, well, I don't agree, well, it's a matter of opinion. I go, no, some of this stuff's not a matter of opinion. Here's the CIA saying they were covering for Labed. Go look that up. Here's the CIA saying it. What are you saying is in doubt here? It's on the CIA's website. Look, there it is. And that's why it's fascinating they took down the Genie Energy page. But I really want you to understand that truth is our weapon. It's not the elite's weapon. It's the people's weapon. Truth and logic are our weapon. And as long as the information can get out there, I think that there's hope. Because I think the elites are scared to death. And they're making it so obvious what they're up to right now that people's spidey sense that they're living in a propaganda authoritarian, consumer authoritarian society's been going off for a while. That's why I talked about the Matrix right last night, and I talked about Fight Club, that sense that people have, you're being fucked on both sides. That sense that people have, you can't trust anybody. You can't trust institutions. You're right, you can't, because it's been going on for hundreds and thousands of years. Hundreds, like thousands of years. There's been a small group of elite people, and you did not have access to transportation or communication that they did, right? And now, suddenly, the advent of cell phones, you and I can talk like this. You can research every single thing that I'm saying. You can see I'm not making anything up, and you can sit there with your jaw dropping, going, well, wait a minute. I have been lied to my whole life. I have been. Imagine how frightening it must be for them. It's their worst nightmare. So, this Vox article is fascinating to me because once you get down to it, it explains even though the allegations had no factual basis to prove anything improper, they were effective propaganda. See, this is a direct lie. There's plenty of factual basis. They don't link to it. They don't mention it to you. The White House made its claims shortly after the first public disclosures. No, but the story came out before he was... But what about the Politico story? See, no reference to it. In the universe here, the Politico story, which is the first thing that pops up in a search. You see what I'm saying? So this is just lie, 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 lie. Between a self-described intermediary for the Russian Federation, that's not true. Natalia Veselnitskaya has never described herself as an intermediary for the Russian Federation. Again, this is just literal lies. That's it. Now, don't just say, well, it's Vox. No, it's everybody. It's not just Vox, it's Vox and Fox. What, did you see Fox go after this? Did you see Hannity night after night? Even Tucker? By the way, I love Tucker. Very nice guy. I think Hannity's being misled. But come on, where was the coverage of this? Where was the coverage of this? That they're provably lying. They're not making any reference to that Politico story. Right? Nothing on it. So that's what's happening. Now, Chalupa, as I was mentioning, she ties to this Ukrainian diaspora. They were the sort of radicals on the side of the Maidan. Now let's talk about the Maidan. Let's start to get into the role of Ukraine in trying to take down Putin and why the Atlantic Council is so involved, right? So after the end of the Cold War, NATO's reason to exist was lessened because it was there to protect against the Soviet Union. Without the Soviet Union, you didn't have that threat anymore. But NATO is an effective vehicle for one of the things we saw Anthony Sutton talking about earlier, which is this sort of one world order thing, like a NATO army and that kind of thing, an international force. By the way, Anthony Sutton also talked in that clip earlier about the use of a world court and that kind of thing. That's just what the Magnitsky Act is effectively, which I'll talk about. It's shocking that there's no journalism about Bill Browder and the Magnitsky Act. This is about 8 people, and they're all on my Twitter feed because I retweet them all the time. Lucy Commissar, Andrei Nekrasov, Alex Craner, people like Brett Harris, people like Stephen McIntyre, people like Tom Luongo, people like Diana West. It's starting to get low. I'm running out of people. I do. Garland does sometimes, my co-host on Fault Lines. And I'm running out of people now. So there's no journalism on it, right? Jack, God bless Jack Posobiec over at OAN has picked up some of this stuff. But nobody's picking up on it, and I've begged them. I've contacted people at Breitbart. I've offered to give them all my material. I've offered to give them everything. They don't want to report on this. And this is a story that, again, the people surrounding Trump were gaslighting him on. No, it's Russian propaganda. No, it's Russian propaganda. They don't want him to know about this story, and neither does anybody at Fox. Otherwise, they wouldn't give Bill Browder his berth the whole time. They let Bill Browder come on and say anything he wants to. The same thing with Solomon. They're pointing all in the same direction. It's that Hegelian false choice. Fox or MSNBC, either way, it's lies about Russia, provable lies about Russia. Because what was really happening is the U.S. and NATO, and that's why the Atlantic Council was involved, was using Ukraine as a way to put pressure on Russia to gin up a Cold War. That was the desired outcome. They want to exacerbate. And once again, this is one of those classic things, the Hegelian thing of let's get Ukraine and Russia even more mad at each other after these centuries of bad blood between them. Let's try to make it even worse. Right? And they managed to do that effectively. And they did that with stuff that we talked about last night. They did that with a program called Civil Society 2.0 that Hillary Clinton introduced. That gave a way to funnel money to George Soros and his NGOs through International Renaissance, and that created the Maidan. The Maidan, in the U.S., they created something called the Digital Maidan, and that was created by Alexandra and Andrea Chalupa. Again, they're Ukrainian activists on the side of the Banderites. That's who they're on the side of. The Nazi side. These are not good people. Okay? Now, let's talk about what happened to the Maidan, because it's crucial. What happened was a protest. Let me just bring up something about that while we're talking about it. Someone's saying, I need an editor, someone who can package this stuff. Or I need to start Citizen Journalism School at citizenjournalismschool.com and urge you to do it as well. You can use, this is just material. This is just a sort of compilation of true things. Write about any of it. Write about any of it. You know what I'm saying? And again, an editor would be great. Here's the position I'm in. Let me just be clear on this. I'm not in a position where I'm going to easily get patrons. if I was going to come out and do the like Israel is wonderful thing or blah blah blah, that'd be great. That's the way you get funded on the right. Period. That's where it's. If you look at the big donors, that's where it is. It's all you got to take a pro Netanyahu, pro Likud position on Israel, and that's what funds the right. That is what in fact funds the right. Look at Adelson. Look, just very, very consistent. And people have told me that in town. But it's very clear what's going on. So I know where that money is in right independent media. And I don't believe in that. I'm not Zionist because I'm against anti-Semitism. And if it doesn't make sense to you, go watch Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro. Go watch something that he says where he talks about this, and he shows that Zionism, and again, he's a rabbi, where he represents ultra-Orthodox Jews, New York. Look him up on YouTube. He says that Zionism is anti-Semitic, and he makes a very compelling case for it. That's rather shocking. Again, it's one of those things you don't get in the world. But as an independent journalist, there's very few outlets. I happen to work for one of them, Sputnik, which is Russian-funded, but there's no ideological litmus test, and they don't ask me to do investigative journalism. All they like me to do is to do a funny show where I'm entertaining and talk about the news. It just so happens it's my personality and my vocation that I do independent reporting and research, but it doesn't pay the bills. And most people in this town end up hooking up with a think tank. There's no think tank. There's no populist think tank right now. So this is why I go directly to people for donations, and I appreciate when we get them. And they make a big frickin' difference because all of this research, there's no infrastructure support for it. None, because it's the truth, but it doesn't really fit anybody's agenda except maybe yours and that of regular people, but it doesn't really fit anybody's agenda. So all that stuff, well, you should get an editor or whatever, it'd be nice, sure, but that's why I started the school. So let's talk about the Medan and specifically the formation of Nabu. Okay, so National Anti-Corruption Ukraine. Okay, so what you're going to see here is the official website of something called NABU, which is the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine. If you go to their website, as I'm going to do now, and you type in FBI, you'll find, again, not conjecture, this is what they're saying. NABU will continue cooperation with FBI for 2 more years. Now, this is in 2017, so it's 2 more years. It's increasing their thing that back in a memorandum was signed in June of 2016. That's significant, by the way, because that's when 2 officials from NABU were in Washington, D.C., meeting at the JW Marriott, by the way. That happened in June. And it's also, by the way, oh, no, wait. Was it June? I take that back. The meeting at the Marriott may have happened in a different month. But it was sometime. It may have happened earlier, but whatever. There was a meeting between them. But it says, thanks to the cooperation. So in other words, June 2016 means before August 2016. That's when Manafort got knocked out. That's why this date's important. The FBI had an office there, and they said, since February 2016, the representative of the FBI has a permanent office in NABU, and jointly with Naboo detectives works on the execution of international requests and controls their passage through the competent authorities of the United States of America. Okay. I know it's something cliched that people, and Jack Posobiec uses it very well, but let me say something. Let that sink in. Let's look at it again. Let it sink in. Since February 2016, the representative of the FBI has a permanent office in the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, and jointly with its detectives works on the execution of international requests and controls their passage through the competent authorities of the United States of America. Okay. That would mean that after 2016, certainly, anything that was going on with Naboo that related to the U.S. would have gone through the FBI, of which James Comey was the director. Correct? Is my math correct there? February 2016 is before the thing. Now, let's point out what happened. I want you to see this so far. Let's point out what happened with this election interference. What happened was that, do it this way, New York Times, let me do it this way. New York Times, New York Times, August 14, Leschenko. Let's try Ukraine. Manafort. There we go. That's August 15th. Hang on. Oh, see, this is a new story. I got to look at this. Enclosed hearing, a clue about the heart of Manafort. Hang on one second. I've never seen this story before. About the heart of Mueller's Russia inquiry. So I'm looking at a story for the first time. I'm just going to show you how I read this stuff. Okay, Sharon Lafreniere, I know her. Ken Vogel, who wrote that Politico piece, and Scott Shane. I've talked to Scott before, too. There are a few hints to emerge from the special counsel Robert Mueller about evidence of possible collusion. President Trump and campaign in Russia. In a closed-door hearing. People in his orbit were discussing deals to end a dispute over Russia's incursions into Ukraine. And possibly, okay, I see what this is about. That's just skimming it. I got to go back and read it later. It just seems like another bullshit story. So here's what I'm looking for, though. Secret ledger in Ukraine, less cash. So here's the original story from the New York Times. This broke on August 14th, 2016. This is what was ruled by a Ukrainian court to be election interference. And I'm going to tell you, when you know what I just showed you from Naboo's website, when you know that the FBI, James Comey's FBI, had an office there, and that representatives of Naboo were working with the FBI, I want you to think about the so first off, just from what we know here, just the fact that we know that Naboo interfered in the election tells you that the FBI interfered in the election. Do you understand that, why I'm saying that? Because the FBI was working with Naboo. And we can even see that if we read this initial story. come right here. Handwritten ledgers, and this is later found to be false, and the handwritten ledgers show $12.7 million in undisclosed cash payments designated for Mr. Manafort for Mr. Yanukovych's pro-Russia political party from 2007 to 2012, according to Ukraine's newly formed National Anti-Corruption Bureau. Now, it mentions the FBI, but I'm just going to go back and point this out again. It's telling you the ledger was released by NABU. Now again, I want to go over this again. I'm going through this slowly, but I really want this to sink into you. I just showed you that the FBI had an office in Naboo. And I just showed you that Naboo, and I could show it to you on Naboo's website, that they were the ones who were the source of the information that took them out. And I also showed you that Naboo was adjudicated to have interfered in our election. So, therefore, since Naboo is working with the FBI under James Comey interfered in the U.S. election. Do you understand how important that story is? Now add to the fact that Chuck Ross just reported on Friday that Leschenko, who is Leschenko? Leschenko is the guy listed here They don't mention his name till a ways down. Hang on. Mysterious payments, blah, blah, blah. It's all background. Black Ledger. Da, da, da. By the way, they got the Black Ledger from the DOJ, I've been led to understand. They don't mention who's behind this until way, way down here. Here's a little bit on the Anti-Corruption Bureau. There's a statement from the Anti-Corruption Bureau. Again, that's the FBI. Here we go. The accounting records surfaced this year when Sergei Leschenko, a member of the parliament, who said he received a partial copy from a source he did not identify, published line items. So here's this guy interfering in the U.S. election. They don't tell you that Leschenko is backed by Soros and Pinchuk, Hillary Clinton's two top contributors. Victor Pinchuk is the biggest single donor to the Clinton Foundation. George Soros was also, in 2015, the biggest political donor of anybody, giving money to Hillary Clinton's campaign. So Leschenko is backed by these two, okay? They don't mention that. Just the fact that they're her two biggest campaign supporters makes it news. The New York Times doesn't report that. Nobody does. Breitbart, nobody does. Nobody does. This is used to throw Manafort under the bus very quickly. Now it comes out, Chuck, Ross, Nully, or Leschenko. I really want you to see this is the keys to the whole kingdom here. If you wanted to break this story, all you'd have to do is get on a big media outlet, hang on one sec. So in testimony in October, this is reported on Friday before John Solomon started to distract from it, that Nellie Orr told lawmakers in October that one of Fusion GPS's sources was Sergei Leschenko. That's who it is. Leschenko was the leading voice in the Black Ledger and so on and so forth. So, now again, let's let that sink in. Because we know that this was election interference by the FBI working with Naboo and Leschenko, the fact that Leschenko was also a source for Fusion is very, very interesting. But it leads to a couple of very interesting questions that people don't want to get into, and I'm probably not going to get into now. The lie that Fox News viewers are being told is this Spygate lie, that the whole Trump Tower meeting was a setup, that the Russian lawyer is really up to no good, and that the Russians are trying to get, the Russians are allied with Hillary. I went over all the reasons that's bullshit last night. It's complete bullshit, though. This is the real story. You can see it. There's no conjecture. The FBI had an office in Naboo. Now, we need a politician to ask them about it, or we need a reporter to ask them about it. We need somebody to do this work. I'm doing as much as I can, but we need somebody to do that work. But the whole story is laid out. So the question is, again, why isn't Fox covering it? And we know the answer, because I've gone over it multiple times. It's all an illusion. It's the reason Fox isn't covering it is Fox's whole purpose is to provide the illusion of an opposition. The illusion of an opposition. But in fact, this is what's happening, right? And they know that if they open it up, and then you get into the fact that Soros is also a backer of Browder, and that USAID is also a backer of Browder. I went over that last night, the government. Then when you go over the fact that the people at the State Department who are still, Poroshenko is still in place. They've convinced Trump that Poroshenko, who was also behind this, is his ally. So, where are we at? 9:30. I'm going to be honest. I'm starting to drift again. I'm feeling tired, and I got a radio show to host. So I think I'm going to leave that there. I think I'm going to leave it there. I thought I could make 2 hours. Whatever. I'm tired. I don't feel bad. Anyway, hopefully you learned some stuff from there. Hopefully this is starting to make sense. I didn't get into the Syria component yet, but that's the other part that this whole thing is meant to cover up. The fact that the U.S. was on the wrong side of Syria, right? And but this Ukrainian stuff I want to get into. What's interesting is the Syria stuff, it's the same players. It's John McCain, it's the Hillary Clinton State Department, it's the John Kerry State Department. But there we go. But anyway, hopefully this clears up some stuff and makes sense. I'll be back. I'll be talking about some of this stuff on my radio show tomorrow, Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan. Do me a favor, retweet this. If you have questions or comments or something like that, I'll try to get to them. I'll let it go then. Let's watch this one more time, shall we?
You were both in Skull and Bones, the secret society.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America? The conspiracy theorists are going to go
I'm
on.
sure they are. I don't know. I haven't seen the web.
Number 322?
First of all, he's not the nominee. And, look, I look forward...
Are you prepared to lose?
No, I'm not going to lose.
You both were members of Skull and Bones, a secret society at Yale. What does that tell us?
Not much, because it's a secret.
Is there a secret handshake? Is there a secret code?
I wish there were something secret I could manifest.
322, secret number?
There are all kinds of secrets, Tim, but one thing is not a secret. I disagree with this president's direction that he's taking the country. We can do a better job, and I intend to do it.
And we'll be watching. Be safe on the campaign trail. John Kerry, thanks for joining us. And we'll be right back.